Hello, second period. It's been a very long time since I've read, it feels like. If you did not go back and listen to Friday, March 20th, you need to go back and listen to that before you listen to today's. I had a really hard time getting Fridays to post for some reason, and it took me days. So if you haven't listened to Friday, March 20th, go back and listen to that before you listen to today's. I have Sophie with me here, and she wants to tell you a couple jokes first. Go.
Why is a bear on the beach?
Why is a bear on the beach?
Lost.
Because he's lost. Okay.
And why does the carpet move?
Why does the carpet move?
Because it's a magic carpet.
It's a magic carpet.
And this is one that Mommy thought that was really funny.
Okay.
Ready? Why do bears run?
Why do bears run?
Because they're scared.
Because they're scared. Okay, those were funny, Sophie. Thank you. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Now, she said bye. All right, bye, Sophie.
Bye, Mommy.
The last time I read, okay, so Kip had got the key and he turned the lock and went into the room with the green door. But then the chapter just stopped there, him stepping into the room, and it doesn't tell us anything that happened from that. So chapter 33 is called Collapse. Molly carefully pulled the tea cart into the yard. Cups and saucers rattled as it rolled over cobblestones and mud. Your tea is ready, ma'am. Mistress Windsor was out behind the house, admiring her garden. The garden was hers because she owned the land that it sat upon, but really it belonged to Kip. He was the one who had spent all spring weeding and tilling and planting and pruning. Where there had been decay and ruin, there was now abundant life. Flowers of all different colors ran along the winding stone footpath, stones that Molly had helped him carry from the bank of the river. Above the path were hanging baskets that Kip had made from wire, now overflowing with ivy and begonias. There were moss-covered stumps and even a small pond. It was not a proper English garden, perhaps, but it was something. Molly cast an eye across the lawn. She could see her brother chopping firewood, something he did when he wanted to think. Ever since their trip to the village 2 days before, Kip had been distant towards her. She pushed a flood of worries from her mind, not wanting to dwell on what thoughts might be troubling him. Molly brought the cart alongside Mistress Windsor, who was seated in a wrought iron chaise lounge. It was a hot morning, but the woman had 2 blankets wrapped around her shoulders nonetheless. Tell your brother the pond needs skimming, she said, adjusting the ring and circling her finger. Yes, ma'am. Molly poured the tea into a cup. And the ivy is beginning to choke the hedges. Yes, ma'am. Molly added 2 lumps of sugar and stirred until the white grains had dissolved into nothing. She offered the tea to her mistress, who took it in her pale hands. The teacup clattered violently against its saucer as Constance brought it to her lips. Molly tried not to stare, but she could not look away. The woman seemed almost translucent in the sunlight. Tiny blue veins shone just beneath the skin of her neck. Her once shining hair was wispy and thin, like a mess of black cobwebs. Her mouth had turned as dark as her eyes. Molly had never seen a dead person before, but she knew she was looking at death. Mistress Windsor must have marked the concern on Molly's face, for she pulled herself upright and set aside her cup and saucer. Is something the matter? No, ma'am. Molly turned her cart around. I was lost in my thoughts. Constance caught Molly's arm in her cold hand. And what thought would that be? Molly could not tell if this was a plea or a challenge. She stared at the ring on the woman's emaciated finger. I was just thinking of something you said when me and Kip first came here. You talked about a reasonable fear of illness. Those were your very words. Constance let go of her arm. You have a prodigious memory. Molly took a shaky breath. If this house is making you sick, then why do you stay? Constance creased her lips. I could ask you the same thing, but I already know the answer. Her dark gaze drifted to Molly's side. Those letters you keep in your pocket. Molly started. You know about the letters? Constance waved off her alarm. Not their precise contents, mind you. I've seen you poring over them when you think you're alone. But of course no one's ever alone in this house, not truly. She glanced toward the branches towering over the roof. I remain here for the same reason you do. I would no sooner leave this place than you would burn those letters. Molly put a protective hand over her apron pocket. Never! Constance smiled. Exactly. Without the tree, without its gifts, we would be completely unmoored. She sat back in her chair. This time, when she took her teacup, she used both hands so it would not shake. I should think that a touch of fever is a small price to pay for such a bounty, she sipped. Wouldn't you agree? Yes, ma'am. The conversation was over. Molly curtsied and returned to the house. She closed the kitchen door behind her, feeling an icy knot of dread in her stomach. She slid her hand into her pocket and removed the stack of envelopes from the tree. Each one was stained with salt, water, and addressed to the same fragile hand. It was her mother's handwriting. She knew it was. And yet, what if it wasn't? What if the words inside these letters were not written by her parents, but written by some magic of the tree? A tree that fed off people who needed to keep them close. She removed one of the letters from its envelope. Like every other letter in the stack, it ended the same way, with Ma and Dad promising that they would come soon and then giving Molly one final instruction. Stay put. Molly said the words aloud, and this time she did not hear Ma's voice in her head. Instead, she heard a distant, more hollow voice, a voice like the wind. Molly did not even know what she was doing as she approached the stove. She crouched down and opened the iron door to the oven. Hot air swept over her face. The embers inside were still red. Molly ran her fingers over the stack of letters. Her bottom lip shook as she tried to form the words that might help her let go. Goodbye, she said, sliding the envelope into the stove. Molly blinked through tears as fire licked up the side of the paper, consuming the letters. No! She snatched the envelopes back from the oven, burning her hand. She smothered the flames in her apron. The envelopes were singed on one end, but they had been saved. She had saved them. Molly closed her eyes, clutching them against her chest. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm sorry. But she did not even know whom she was talking to. Crash! Molly heard a noise outside. She hurriedly tucked the letters back into her pocket. Is that you, ma'am? She called, opening the door. There was no reply. Molly ran toward the garden. Ma'am? A shattered teacup lay on the ground. The cart was overturned. Mistress Windsor lay on the gravel, not moving. Molly grabbed hold of the woman and shook her. What's happened? Constance was ice cold to the touch. Her eyes were turned up in her head. Her dark lips were parted, and from them Molly could feel no breath. Kip! Master Windsor! She cried. Someone help! Chapter 34 is called Leeches and Lizards. Molly stepped into Mistress Windsor's bedroom. Doctor, I've brought more water. She held up a sort of wineskin made from India rubber. It was filled with boiling water that made it almost too hot to hold. At her feet, girl, the doctor said. Constance Windsor lay in bed, tossing her head back and forth, muttering under her breath. Molly went to the end of the bed, which was piled high with nearly a dozen blankets. She pulled the blankets back to reveal Constance's bare feet. Molly felt uncomfortable handling them. They were meliscent, clammy, and far too cold. She slid the bag of hot water beneath the feet and retucked the blankets under the mattress. Oh, Connie, my poor sweet Connie. Master Windsor stood by the far wall, wringing his hands. His hair was disheveled, and his face was gray with stubble. It had been 2 days since his wife had collapsed in the garden, and all that time he had not left her side. Dr. Crouch took a measurement of the patient's head with a pincer tool. Seems normal enough, he muttered, consulting a chart on the bedside table. He wore gold spectacles on the very end of his nose, which forced him to tilt his whole head to look at people. Not that he ever bothered looking at Molly. He opened his black leather bag and removed a sort of chopper funnel, the small end of which he put into his ear. He held the other end over Mistress Windsor's chest and listened for a few seconds. Very peculiar. Bertrand stepped forward. Well, what is it? The doctor removed a little book from his vest and, consulting his pocket watch, made a notion. He spoke as he wrote. Heart rate and eye movement led me to believe that your wife is not asleep. Rather, she is caught in a sort of ester state, something between sleeping and waking. Call it suspended somnambulism. He made a pleased face. Yes, that's just the name for it. He quickly scribbled another note to himself, chuckling. Crouch, old boy, just wait until the Academy hears of this. Surely there's a cure, Bertrand said in a tone befitting a question. Dr. Crouch finished writing. Bed rest. And not just for her. The mysterious fever I witnessed in your family before has clearly accelerated. I fear it will only be a matter of time until the rest of you succumb. Molly cleared her throat. You're not going to try leeches, sir? This was what healers had always done in Molly's village back home. They were supposed to draw poisons from the blood. Leeches? The man snorted. Does the woman look like she has fluids to spare? Next, I suppose you'll tell me to ply her with nightshade or bathe her with quicksilver. My girl, we are on the cusp of a modern age, and with it comes modern medicine. He dug a fat hand through his bag and removed a small bottle. Take this landulum, for example. Wonderful stuff. I have a few drops in my tea each morning to calm my nerves. Molly felt her cheeks burn. The man had a way of talking that made her feel stupid. I'll go check on supper, she said. She lowered her head and retreated to the hall. Alistair and Penny were huddled outside the door. Is Mommy all right? Penny asked, craning her neck to see into the room. Okay, I'm stopping there. Have a good day. I'll be back tomorrow.